Hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar. I love a good webinar Wednesday. I'm Erica Stacey from Scout Digital Training and I'm really excited to have a chat to you about Google Tag Manager today. There's been a few queries about it over the last couple of weeks and I've been avoiding it a little bit because it's not my area of expertise, but I have been working with Google Tag Manager for a while and I feel like I have a bit of information to offer and provide in this area. So that's what we're going to be running through this morning. So today's webinar is going to run for about 1 hour. It is being recorded as well, so all registrants will automatically receive a link to watch the replay of this webinar after we finish the live broadcast. So if you do have to leave early, then rest assured that that video will come through to you later on. And the video is also really useful for watching back if you want to try and follow along with some of these things or work through it, then you can stop and start the video later on, whereas I'm going to be working quite quickly through some of these areas today. And the video will also be going up in the webinar section of our website probably within the week, depends how busy we get. So you can see that, and all of the other webinars that we've run are in that webinar section of our website. So if you weren't registered for any of those, do know that you can always go over and watch them over there. Housekeeping, chat box, not sure which way I'm pointing. You can pop bits and pieces in there. I'll ask a few questions. But if you do have any specific questions, it's really great to use the questions feature at the bottom of the webinar screen. So you can type in your question there. I'll see how I go with keeping an eye on them during the broadcast. It sometimes distracts me a little bit, but I can definitely answer them at the end, and they'll be answered verbally there as well. I think that's all of my housekeeping. I really should have a list for what we go through, but here we go. Let's jump in. So Google Tag Manager, and what we're going to be talking about today is what Google Tag Manager actually is, how Google Tag Manager works, the benefits of Google Tag Manager, and I'm going to introduce just some of the things you can do with Google Tag Manager. So this is not going to be a full, comprehensive, detailed how-to type thing. It's just to let you know what the hell it is, why it's a good thing to use, and the reasons why, based on what you can do with it. So I'm going to be running through a couple of examples really quickly, but it's more just to give you a bit of a taste and an understanding so you can consider potentially using it for your own website. And it might be in a very simple way. There's a very simple way you can use it, or and that's a great place to start. It's where I started. And then once you get more comfortable, you can push it a little bit further as well. So a bit of a disclaimer to start with, and I did kind of touch on this. I am not a Google Tag Manager expert. I have had a little bit of instruction from other people, and I am largely self-taught. So I have been using Google Tag Manager for quite a number of years, but in a very, very basic fashion. Early on, so 3-4 years ago, it was very much a case of install the Google Tag Manager container on the site, pop in maybe Google Analytics code, maybe Facebook Pixel if I was feeling excited, and that was it. So it's only more recently that I've been working more with event tracking and other things, which I'll talk about in Google Tag Manager. I'm not a programmer. I am a digital marketer who understands a bit of code, and I think would be helpful for this session because I can definitely come at it from a business owner's and a marketer's perspective. It'll definitely be a lay person's explanation of Google Tag Manager, which hopefully will be suitable for all of you as well. So just passing on, as I like to do, passing on my knowledge and expertise. So before we get started, it'd be great if you could just pop in the chat box a yes, no, or not sure as to whether or not you are using Google Tag Manager already. So whether you have one site, whether you're working on multiple sites, just pop it in there, and I'll keep an eye on those answers. So it looks like we've got whoa, There's a lot of people here today. This is awesome. So yeah, a little bit of a mix there with some, probably the no's are winning at the moment. There's a few people who are using it, some who are not sure. Oh, so like I said, we will just be touching the surface of it today, but hopefully there'll be something in there for everyone, and we can certainly do some more follow-up sessions if you're interested in getting into it in more detail. So Google Tag Manager, the name kind of says it, but is also kind of a bit vague as well. It's a tag manager. It manages tags, but what does that actually mean? So basically what it manages is all of those little snippets of code, those pieces of code, any kind of script that needs to be installed in your website, usually from a third-party provider. So Google Analytics is the one example that we often use. Google Analytics is a piece of code that needs to be installed in your website before it can start tracking your website activity. There's a number of different ways to install it. It has to go in a particular position. Google Tag Manager has the capacity to manage that code for you. And I've got a few slides which will hopefully explain the reason and how this works. So it was invented or first released in 2012. It's obviously a Google product. They have, anybody who joined in the last webinar, I had a screen showing all of Google's products because I wasn't actually aware of exactly how many they have. There are literally hundreds. So this one's been around since 2012, had a major update in 2014, 2016, but is designed to assist with this issue we have of managing tags and pieces of code, because it can get pretty messy. It's also referred to as GTM often as an abbreviation, which I always find quite funny when people refer to Groove in the Moo as GTM, because I'm always like, no, that's Google Tag Manager. So I'm a real nerd and not a festival goer anymore. So basically, we think about our website. You visit any website, there's a beautiful visual website that the public sees, and that's what we generally see. But before you even get to the code which produces the visual website that we see, there's all these other bits of scripts and code that exist in what we call the head tag. So when you're actually looking at the code that builds up a page, such as the one on our website, it will look something like this. And there's all sorts of stuff that goes in the head tag, and this content needs to go in there. A lot of it needs to go in the head tag as well, but this is where we actually add a lot of those scripts. So it'll bring in your style sheet, so how your website needs to look. It brings in your metadata, which we use for SEO purposes and also sharing on social and those types of things. All this extra information that we don't see on the visual page, but is necessary to make the website work and function. I'm going to try and not get too deep into this. So we can imagine we've got this head tag. And like I said, there's other bits of code that needs to exist in the head tag. You're never going to see a completely empty head tag, but just for this purpose of this explanation and Google Tag Manager, let me going to entertain me here. But we've got this head tag, and then you'll set up Google Analytics, and they'll say, put the Google Analytics code in the head tag. So you'll pop a few lines of code. That's my example of a few lines of code. A few lines of code in the head tag. Great. Google Analytics starts working. Then you want to start doing AdWords remarketing. So you've got another piece of code that you need to pop in the head tag. Paste that in there. Then you want to use Facebook Pixel. So you get another piece of code that goes in there. Then you might use Hotjar or a heat mapping or screen recording software, and that has a piece of code that wants to go in the head tag as well. And then you might LinkedIn has their own conversion tracking I discovered recently, and they've got a bit of code that goes in the head tag. So as you can imagine, all these different third-party tools that we end up using that recording something to do with our website all have their own pieces of code that all need to go in the head tag. And this can cause a number of issues. So the main issues with this are often not everybody is comfortable accessing and editing the website code at this point. So you may give this piece of code to a developer to install for you. So that's just an extra step in the process, and you may work with multiple developers. They may install them in different ways. So there's that as being a little bit of a housekeeping factor. We might also stop using certain tools after a while. So we put the code in the site and then we've done our 14-day free trial of Hotjar and decide we don't want to use it anymore, but we just leave the code in there. We forget about it. So, and every bit of code that your website needs to load slows down our website's loading speed slightly. So when we have lots of pieces of code to run, it can actually slow down the speed of our site as well. You can also have conflicts that occur between different pieces of code and how it actually works with your site. So one piece of code has to run before another piece of code typically. And if one of them has an issue, it can cause a problem down the track, and it can be really difficult to troubleshoot where that problem actually is. The other thing with some of these pieces of code is they don't all necessarily go in the head tag on all pages. So you might have some in the head tag on the contact page, some in the head tag on all pages. So it's really easy to lose track of all this code that we're putting into our website that we may or may not be using. So Google basically went, no, this is not useful, this is not helpful, this is not a good way of handling all of these pieces of code. It's creating websites that are slow, difficult, messy, disorganized. Let's get rid of all of those pieces of code. So we go back to, let's imagine our empty head tag, even though there are little other bits and pieces that go in there for the website. So instead of pasting in all those different pieces of code, let's paste in one piece of code. So we're still having to paste in some code, but this is the code to our Google Tag Manager container. So it's referred to as a container. So we'll put in one piece of code that runs Google Tag Manager, and then we can actually log into Google Tag Manager through a separate screen, so you don't need to access the website code anymore. Once that container code is installed in the website, you don't need to be adding extra scripts and bits and pieces to the source code anymore. You can log in through Google Tag Manager and you can add all of the different pieces of code that you possibly want. You can see that. So like I mentioned, and you don't need to install all of these. I will just say these are some examples of what you can do. And this is also just scraping the surface. So you might install your Google Analytics code, your Google Ads remarketing code, your Google Search Console verification code, your Facebook pixel, if you're using Hotjar, if you're doing event tracking, your Google Analytics or that type of thing. There's all these different pieces of code that we can actually manage through this separate login. And then when that Google Tag Manager container code runs, when the page loads, it then goes and accesses the pieces of code that it needs. But what's even more exciting is it only runs the pieces of code that it needs to at the time. And I'll show you how that can work as well. So what you'll see when you log into Google Tag Manager, so this is a screenshot of my account, which I'll jump into later on to demonstrate some of these things, is rather than having to scroll through the source code on your website and seeing what all the tags are, or so which tags are in that head tag and potentially looking through different pages to try and find them, we get a nice list of all of the tags that are included in our container, what they are, and how they're being fired. So are they firing on all pages? I'll go through this again in a little bit. Are they firing on all pages, or are they firing on particular pages or when particular things occur? And when did we actually create and install them as well? So it's really nice. We get this lovely list where we can go in, and to be honest, even now I can look and I can go, I'm not using some of those anymore. I can delete those tags from my container. They're not going to run on the website. Another nice thing about Google Tag Manager actually is, because I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but as I showed you that code from my website before, your website's code is public. So people who know how to access that code can go in and they can have a look and they can find out things like your Facebook pixel ID, your Google Analytics property ID, all of those types of things. Whereas when we're running them through Google Tag Manager, they can see your Google Tag Manager container ID, but they actually don't know what other tools you're running. So it's kind of nice from that perspective as well. So we'll be going through this in more detail, but hopefully you can see that it's much easier and you don't need to have it. It helps, I'll have to admit, in certain aspects of Google Tag Manager, it helps if you have a basic understanding of code, but you don't need to actually be accessing the source code of the website yourself, pasting code in the head tag, and being concerned about whether or not it's in the right spot or if it's going to work. So looking at the benefits of Google Tag Manager, firstly, it's free. It's one of usually everyone's favourite benefit. Like with a lot of Google's products, there is a paid 360 version for websites with ultra high levels of traffic and some extra features. But for the vast majority of websites, even quite large websites, the free version is absolutely fine, and that's the one that I use. It is easy to use. Once you get the hang of it, it's got a bit of a process and a few quirks, but as opposed to accessing your website source code, it's definitely much easier. It gives you that easy to understand list of what tags are actually installed on your website and those bits and pieces of information about when they were created, when they're firing, those types of things. So you can see at a glance exactly what code is running on your site. Just like with Google Analytics and Google Ads, you can actually give multiple people access to a Google Tag Manager container via a Google account. And there's also different levels of permissions as well. So some people may just view the container. You can have people who can edit the container, so they can create new tags and new triggers and those types of things. And then the highest level is the ability to actually publish any updates to the live container. So the website code access isn't required to manage your tracking, which is a huge benefit. You can configure the tags to only run when they're required, which I'll go through when we talk about firing triggers. So you're only running code when it needs to be. It can avoid and reduce conflicts that might occur with other code and other plugins. Doesn't always occur, but it can. And often if you're pasting that code directly in your website, it can be quite challenging to troubleshoot. Whereas Google Tag Manager also gives you this really great ability to preview and test your tags, which I'm going to show you how that works as well. So there's 4 main components that make up Google Tag Manager. And I'm actually going to go through them in reverse order because they make more sense to me in this way, because this is the way that you actually create them. So at the top level, we've got a variable. So we don't always use variables, they're optional, and they're a helper function that can be used to manage changing values that are used by the triggers or the tags. And I know that's going to sound a bit weird, but I've got some examples further on that will help illustrate what that actually is. There's a certain number of built-in variables. There's a whole list of built-in variables, such as click URLs and those types of things that exist within Google Tag Manager. And you can also create your own custom variables as well. And I've got an example of a custom variable. So just think of them as, like I said, little helper functions, values, extra bits of information that you might need in your triggers and tags, typically something that you might reuse across different triggers and tags. So you can create it once as a variable and then use it across multiple triggers and tags. So that saves you time as well. So triggers. A trigger is an action that determines when the tag is fired. So a lot of tags, something like Google Analytics, we want that to be fired on all pages. So every single page of the website, we want Google Analytics to be running, so we know, regardless of which page of the website people are on, where they are and what they're doing. However, you can also create other triggers that only fire particular tags based on a particular event, such as like when a button's clicked, when an element's clicked. It might only be on a certain page, like on a confirmation or success page if we're doing purchase or registration or conversion tracking. So, but the triggers and the tags, I said variables are an option. Triggers and tags work together as a pair. And then we've got our tag. So that's the actual snippet of code that sends data to a system. So Google Analytics. Google Analytics is a tag. It needs the trigger of firing on all pages to be able to function. So always think of triggers and tags together. And then the fourth element we have is this data layer. And to be honest, this is where I start to glaze over a little bit with Google Tag Manager. I need to do some more delving in. But essentially, because we are Google Tag Manager is running its code and then it's running these other tags on an as-needs basis, the data layer temporarily holds these different values within the client to be used by the tags and triggers and variables. So we're not going to delve into the data layer too much today. We're going to focus on tags, triggers, and variables. So I mentioned this before, but for example, with something like Google Analytics, you can actually use variables. And this is something I would recommend doing. It's not essential. You can just set up a Google Analytics tag directly and a trigger to have it fire on all pages, but it's quite useful to create some variables. So we can have a variable that's called a constant, which includes your Google Analytics property tracking code, and that's that unique property code relevant to your website. There's also a specific Google Analytics settings variable, which allows you to include that constant. So like I said, this isn't essential, but it's really, really helpful because, like I mentioned, variables can be used across different tags and different triggers and different elements. And if you need to change them, so for some reason, if you decided to change your Google Analytics property tracking code and set up a new one, and then you had to go and update them all in Google Tag Manager. If you had your Google Analytics tag set up, but then also a lot of event tracking and other things which were all tied to that property tracking code, you would need to go through each of those tags individually and update that tracking code for them all to be working. Whereas an advantage of using a variable in this type of instance is if we had, say those 4 or 5 different Google Analytics related tags set up and we had to update our tracking code, we could just go and update that constant, change that UA code, and it would automatically update on all of the other tags. So really, really helpful to think about that, but like I said, not essential. I'll show you how it works. The trigger, for something like Google Analytics, we want the trigger to fire on all pages, and the tag, there's actually a specific Google Analytics tag which steps you through what you need. So don't be nervous about these if this is sounding a little bit overwhelming, because what you will generally find as well is if you are actually using any new tool that is asking you to install code on your website, very often these days they are giving instructions specifically for Google Tag Manager. So the Facebook Pixel, for example, it has some steps for how to install using Google Tag Manager. Same with that LinkedIn Insights one I mentioned in Hotjar. It's also really easy to Google any of these. So, Google Analytics install with Google Tag Manager, Facebook Pixel install with Google Tag Manager. And there's a lot of articles that step through all of these as well. I'll be showing you some of them. And I'll jump into my Google Tag Manager account in a second and show how we can set this up. But this is what you would actually see, for example. So you've got that name at the top, which is editable as well. So you can make that name something that is obviously reflective of what it is, so you understand what it is. And then there's going to be some components at the top here, the tag configuration. And depending on what their tag is, there's going to be some different components. And then down the bottom, we've got a trigger. So in this case, it's a Google Analytics tag. It's using my variable that I have set up there, Google Analytics settings, and it's firing on all pages. We've then got something like a Facebook Pixel. So in the instance of installing a Facebook Pixel, we don't use a variable typically. You potentially could. Oh, no, I'm not going to start saying that with your Facebook Pixel IT. But to set up a Facebook Pixel, typically we don't use variables at all. But again, we want to trigger it to fire on all pages for the basic Facebook Pixel if we're using it for things like remarketing, which is one of the main uses. And in this case, there's actually a tag we need to use called custom HTML. So interestingly, as I'll show you, Google Tag Manager does list a whole heap of different tools with preset tag configurations, but it doesn't for the Facebook Pixel. So I think it's a little bit of that rivalry between Google and Facebook that go on, even though Facebook Pixel is a very, very popular tag that's going in a lot of sites these days. So in this case, we've got a much simpler looking tag, which just allows us to paste in some HTML. To be honest, you could do this with lots of different tags because essentially they're giving you a piece of HTML to install on the site. But it's worthwhile looking through that list and seeing if there is a specific tag that suits your needs as well, because often it'll take care of all those other pieces and it'll be automatically updated if required as well. So in this case, the tag configuration is just that piece of code. And again, the trigger we're using is all pages. And then I won't go into too much detail with this, but I did mention event tracking before, which is something I'm doing a lot more with Google Tag Manager. And event tracking is related to Google Analytics, and it actually tracks interactions with a website that occur within a page independently of the page URL changing. So there's lots of things that people can often do within your website. They might be playing a video, they might be downloading a file, they might be clicking a button using a search tool, that kind of things, all sorts of bits and pieces that people can do on your website that isn't tracked by Google Analytics because it doesn't actually make that URL change. And PDF downloads is actually one of the confusing ones with that, because typically when you click on a PDF or any file on a website, it opens up that PDF and it does show a unique URL with .pdf on the end. But because it's a file and not a web page, it doesn't actually have that Google Analytics tracking code running within the head tags. It doesn't have a head tag. So PDF downloads aren't tracked on websites. There is some manual code that you can install with your PDFs, and there are other ways of managing events such as PDF downloads as well. But I'm doing this a lot more through Google Tag Manager because we can create one tag that tracks all PDF downloads on your website. So it doesn't, once this tag is installed, it's automatically tracking all of those, regardless of whether you add new PDFs, remove PDFs, those types of things, and it's sending all of this information to your Google Analytics events. So in this instance, what we do is create a custom variable, which is defined as any URL containing .pdf. That's what we want to track. So if it contains .pdf, we presume it's a PDF, and that's what we're looking at. The trigger in this case, our trigger is only when a URL is clicked that contains our .pdf custom variable. So we don't want to fire this tag all the time. We only want to fire the tag if someone on the website clicks anything that has .pdf in it. And the tag in this instance, we use the Google Analytics tag again, and it has a specific event track type. So essentially, we're giving Google Tag Manager the elements that Google Analytics event tracking needs, and it's generating that script and sending the information to our Google Analytics accounts as required. So that's where we're getting a little bit more advanced with some of these, but it is a really useful thing to think about because, like I said, you can set it up once and it automatically runs on all PDFs. I've also been doing this for any clicks on email addresses, telephone numbers on websites and those types of things as well, because they're all events on websites that aren't tracked automatically using Google Analytics. Okay, no, let me go back here. I'm going to jump into my Google Tag Manager account rather. Okay. Here we go. So like I said, I do actually have access to a number of different containers for clients and bits and pieces, but I've jumped straight ahead into looking at my container. They also have, I won't go into it in a huge amount of detail, but they have basically a draft mode. So your default workspace is where you're editing. So you can actually create tags, test tags before you publish them to the live version, and also keep track of all of the changes that have occurred as well. So again, really useful for knowing what tags have been installed, when they've been installed, what changes, and those types of things. And then we can see here on the left-hand side, here are those items that we were talking about. So we've got tags. These are all of the tags that are installed on my website at the moment with a bit of an overview about them. These are the editable names, so you can change them to make them something that is going to be recognisable to you, or if you want to use a particular formula, it's going to show you what type of tag it is based on the options you've got to select from, how it's being fired, so if it's on all pages or if there's a specific firing trigger. So this one I was explaining to you, clicks on email addresses, clicks on telephone numbers, PDF downloads, external links, and then when it was last edited as well. And then we've got our triggers. So it also keeps a library of all of our triggers that we've created, and then variables as well. And we can go in and edit any of those. And if we make any updates, it's going to automatically flow through onto all of the different items there. So I'm just going to show you an example of how to create something like your Google Analytics tag on your site. So with any of these, we would click on New. We've got an option up here to put in a name. Like I said, it can be edited, and you do have these folders here, so you can, if you end up getting lots of tags on your website, you can actually group them together. So I'm just going to call this Google Analytics example. We've got our tag configuration first of all. So like I mentioned, with all of these, there's this partnership of a tag and a trigger. And when we click on the tag configuration, these are all of the different types of tags that you can choose from. It doesn't mean it's what you're limited to, because if something that you are using is not listed here, like I mentioned, Facebook pixel, there's also custom HTML and custom image as well. But they've got the most popular ones that are used most often at the top, and then you can scroll down here. So if you're looking to install any tag, I would always recommend scrolling through the list and seeing if you can find what you're looking for first of all. There's a search bar at the top as well. So if it's like, yeah, I'm trying to install Crazy Egg, I'll use that one. I'm actually trying to install my Hotjar tracking code. That LinkedIn Insights tag, which I mentioned, have a look through and see if it exists there first of all, because it's going to give you some real shortcuts in regards to installing and creating that tag. So for Google Analytics, we can actually pop in here, just choose the Google Analytics tag. Our track type, when we're installing our base Google Analytics code, we're actually just wanting to track page views, because that's essentially what Google Analytics does at a default level, is tracking page views. So we'll leave that at that default option there. But there are some other options that you can choose. I mentioned that event tracking before for things like PDFs and PDF downloads and clicks on buttons and those types of things. But what we're actually looking at is page views. And here we've actually got our Google Analytics settings, which in this case, like I mentioned, I would recommend using a variable to, actually you're not able to see that. I don't think it's showing the drop down, sorry, when I'm clicking on these, but I'm just showing some options here. So you could actually override this and just put your tracking ID directly in there, so that UA 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, it is possible. You don't need a variable. But like I mentioned, if you are, or if there's a chance that you're going to be using your Google Analytics in other ways in Google Tag Manager, it helps to have that variable set up, and it's something that you can do afterwards as well. So if you've already got Google Analytics installed through Google Tag Manager in your site, and your tracking ID has been installed manually, you can update it and you can create that variable. That's absolutely fine. But because if we want to create a new variable, we can go down here into our variable section on the left-hand side. Otherwise, we can create a new variable directly from here, and it's automatically brought up this variable type Google Analytics settings. We could actually pop in our tracking ID here. I'm just going to put example on mine again, because it's not a real one. Like I said, you could do this with creating that constant and the Google Analytics settings, but this also works absolutely fine as well. We can click save here. Oh, okay. It didn't like my example. Cool. And then you can see here we've actually selected that example, and if for some reason we needed to go and change that property code in the future, we could actually go and edit that variable. So there are some other options down here, but for your very, very default Google Analytics install, this is all we need to do. We select the Google Analytics tag, we leave it at page view, and we pop in our Google Analytics settings, which is drawing in that property ID, which is going to run on our website. And then we then need to choose our trigger. So generally, if you are new to Google Tag Manager, you will only have one trigger available, and it will be all pages. These are all custom triggers that I have created since starting to use Google Tag Manager. So do not be alarmed if you only have one all pages trigger in your list, and it is the one that you will most often use. So we can choose all pages here. You do have some options to put exceptions in here. So if you want it to run on all pages except a certain section, then you've got that option there as well with another trigger. But by default, this is what we would need. We've got our Google Analytics example tag. It's been configured and it has a trigger there as well. So we can click on save. And we'll see it sitting in the list here now. This is ordered in alphabetical, but we could actually change it by any of these other means as well. And we can see it's last edited a few seconds ago, what type of tag it is, what the firing trigger is, and we can click in there and make any changes to it as well if we want. So relatively straightforward. This is still in draft as well. So we're in our, what's it called, default workspace at the moment. We're editing. We've made some changes. It will show what changes have been made, but the published live version of our website is still the one from 14 days ago. We can actually test this though, which is really, really cool. So this is one of my favorite things about Google Tag Manager is the ability to preview and test and troubleshoot your tags. Sadly, I see a lot of people skipping this step and things aren't working and aren't running, but it's literally at our fingertips that we can check whether or not our tags are working and if we've got any problems rather than waiting days and weeks to try and sort them out. So you'll see up here on the right-hand side, we've got this option called preview. And if we click on that, it's going to put us into preview mode, which essentially is going to emulate how the tags would work, the tags from the default workspace, the one that we're editing, how it could potentially be working on our website. It does include all the other tags as well. So what this allows you to do once you've enabled it is actually go back to your website or open your website. You might need to refresh it if you already have it open. And it's going to bring up this little drawer at the bottom, which is your Tag Manager preview drawer. And it shows you all of the tags that have been fired on this page. And you can browse your entire website and see which ones have been fired. So we've got, these are the tags which are all set to fire on all pages. So I can see, yeah, they're actually working. It'll also show me which tags have not been fired on this page. And these are the ones that should have some conditional triggers around them, or if they have not been set up correctly. So for example, unfortunately, it is possible to create a tag that doesn't have a trigger. And I was doing some troubleshooting the other day with someone who had set up their Google Analytics tag, but they hadn't set a trigger for it at all. So it wasn't firing. So Google Analytics was actually sitting down here as not fired because we needed to add that fire on all pages trigger. So we can see here, these are the tags that aren't firing. Just because they're not firing doesn't mean they're not working, because with some of these, we actually don't want them to fire on all pages as well. But we can go and test, get rid of that. We can go and test whether or not they're actually working. So I can test something like an outbound link or a PDF download. Let's go down to our latest blog post because I know that has some outbound links on it. So we can see again, every time we open up a new page, it's going to tell us which tags have been fired and which ones haven't. We scroll down here. Yep, here's an external link. So I can actually click on this link. Oh, it's going to open a new page. So you didn't actually get to see it move, but that outbound links tag has actually moved from being not fired to being fired because I've opened up a link to another website. I've called it outbound links. And it's confirmed that it has actually worked, which is awesome. I think we also have a PDF. Yeah, we've got a PDF here as well. So I can do the same thing. I can click on that PDF. It's opened it up in the new page. And there we go. Our PDF downloads tag is fired. So I can see that they're actually working. And I could also open up my Google Analytics, look at the real-time reports in Google Analytics and under the events and see that those two events have actually we can do that right now. I forgot that I had this open, real-time events. It will give us a list of everything that's happened up to the last 30 minutes. and we can see that outbound links has been clicked. The PDF one hasn't hit there yet. Sometimes there can be a couple of minutes delay. Oh, actually, it's not going to be showing me because I'm filtered out of my Google Analytics data. Sometimes just a little bit too efficient. Cool, so I should be able to see it on this one because this has all visitors. There we go. So we've got a download. Click there. And outbound link, well, there's been quite a few outbound link clicks, but we can see I could isolate that that's my visit there as well. So really useful to figure out whether or not your tags are actually working, and you want to be doing and testing this before you actually publish them to the live container. So as at the moment, this is only visible to us, not visible or functional to any of our website visitors, but we could go back to Google Tag Manager, and if we were happy with that, we could click on Submit. So that's actually going to submit our changes to the live site. I am not going to do this because that is an incorrect tag and variable that I've just created. But if I were to do this, I could go new Google Analytics tracking code installed. I generally just give my versions a descriptive name, but you can also put in a longer description if you wanted to say exactly what it was that you'd done and why as well. And any updates here will also be attached to the individual user. So if you've got multiple people working on your website, you'll be able to track back and see every time a change has been made on that container and who's changed it as well, and what the actual workspace changes were. So that's the other thing to keep in mind, is not just making sure you've got that tag and trigger configuration and test them that they're working, but make sure they actually get published to the live site as well if you want that tracking to occur. But we're going to get rid of this for now, and I'll tidy them up later on. So like I said, there's lots of things you can actually do with Google Tag Manager. The biggest thing though is just getting your head around how it actually works and why you would potentially use it. And then look at if you're not using it already. Like I said, I'm migrating a lot of our sites over to using Google Tag Manager, even if at the moment they only have 1 or 2 tags that might be Google Analytics and Facebook tracking code, for example, because I think in the future, it's going to give us a lot more flexibility if we need to add new tools or start exploring some more options such as event tracking and those types of things. So if you are wanting to make a change though, obviously with something like Google Analytics and Facebook Pixel, we want to minimize downtime as much as possible. So if you don't have the Google Analytics tag on your website, you're not going to be getting any traffic from it. So it's not something that I would, spend kind of days working on here or there. You might spend some days planning, but when you actually come to making this update and this transition, it needs to happen very, very quickly. So firstly, I would recommend auditing and planning all of your website tags. So what is actually running on your website at the moment, and if they've all been installed manually into the head tag, then it might take a little bit of crawling through to figure out what it is you actually need. You might find some that you can get rid of as well and do a bit of a cleanup and housekeeping, but just list what all of those are and make sure you have all of the necessary logins and details for them as well. You then need to obviously sign up for Google Tag Manager, which requires a Google account, and it will give you that piece of container code to install in that head tag on your website. And there's a number of ways that you can do that. So a lot of content management systems these days, CMS, will actually, they might have an area for header code injection. I think Squarespace call it header code injection. For WordPress websites, there's a plugin called Header and Footer Code Manager. And WordPress also has a specific Google Tag Manager plugin as well. So you would need to install that Google Tag Manager container code in your website first of all and confirm that it is actually there. Leave all your other tags still in place. This could be done later on, but it's worthwhile considering who needs access to the container and what kind of permissions they might need. If you're part of a large organisation, if you're working with external developers, those types of things, they can be added later on as well. And then very quickly, you want to, or actually you could probably do this in the other way. You could create all of your tags within Google Tag Manager and not publish it, but preview it just to check that it's all actually working. So do that preview and that test. And then just before you publish the container, remove all the other tags. So it might not be directly, I mean, essentially they're running in the head tag, but it's going to be a case of removing them from the website in whatever way they've been added. So if you're using something like the Monster Insights plugin for WordPress to install your Google Analytics code, or pasting your Google Analytics property code directly into the theme of your website, or I know Squarespace and a lot of other sites have a specific place for your Google Analytics code, you need to pull that out. Otherwise, you're going to be getting twice as much traffic and twice as much activity recorded in your Google Analytics because it's going to be running twice. So that's just something to keep in mind. So you want to remove all of those pieces of code, publish that container, making sure that all those tags have a trigger, you've tested them all, and I would always go back and test it again afterwards. And with something like Google Analytics, go into your real time, check that it's actually tracking and you're seeing visitors on your website or seeing yourself, providing you haven't filtered yourself out. Go back into your Facebook Ads Manager and check that your Facebook pixel is active. Make sure that it's all working before you leave, basically, because we don't want to lose anything here as well. Jenny, I've just seen your question. Yes. So hopefully I've just answered it then. You do need to remove all the tags that are in the header, so you're not duplicating them, because we're trying to simplify it here. But I would, like I mentioned, I would create the Google Tag Manager container code and install that first. Create all of your tags and test them, and then remove all of the other tags, however they've been added, very, very quickly before publishing that container. Or, you know, if you have a slight overlap, it's not going to be the end of the world, but you certainly don't want to have, you know, minutes or hours or days either overlap or with nothing in there as well. Oh, so hopefully that has given you a bit of an overview into Google Tag Manager, how it works and why you might use it. Like I said, it's absolutely fine if at the very least you are using Google Tag Manager just to deploy your Google Analytics tracking code. The thing to keep in mind is know that if you're using Google Tag Manager, you're using Google Tag Manager. So don't start adding code in other ways in your website. Don't start you know, using other plugins, because that'll just defeat the purpose. If any code needs to be installed in your website, it needs to go in through Google Tag Manager. That's actually going to give you that ability to see exactly what's running on your website, avoid any of those conflicts, and do that preview and testing as well. I will look at providing some more information about this if people are interested. I'm working on a couple of cheat sheets at the moment that just go through the actual step-by-steps for some of that event tracking. So things like PDF downloads and outbound links and telephone clicks and those types of things. So the variables, triggers and tags that you need to create for those. So if you're interested in getting that download, let me know either in the chat box or hit me up on our social channels as well, and I can send that out to people who are interested. So just to wrap up with a few things that are coming up. Digital Adelaide is a conference that's on next Friday, 26th of July. Scout Digital Training is very proud to be sponsoring it. It's being managed and put on by the awesome folks over at Refuel Creative, and tickets are available now for it via Eventbrite. You can get there on their website. They released their final list of speakers yesterday. They've got a couple of people from HubSpot. They've got Simone Douglas from Social Media AOK here in Adelaide. Ryan's going to be chatting as well. They're streaming in some people live from the US. And Paul Gordon, everyone's favourite online lawyer, is going to be chatting as well. So you can check out the schedule and everything over on their website. And if you have gone before, I saw an email saying that there's going to be a promo code coming out this week for past attendees to get the ticket slightly cheaper. So look out for that as well. We have our Google Analytics Masterclass coming up in a few weeks' time as well. So Thursday, the 1st of August at Intersect on Flinders Street in Adelaide. It's going from 9 till 5. So full day immersion into all things Google Analytics. The early bird rate expires 6 o'clock tomorrow night, and then we flick over to the regular rates. That's the individual person cost, but if you have 2 or 3 people that are looking to register, then the rate is even cheaper again. All of the links, there should be an offers section at the bottom of your screen, which has all the quick links to these items that I'm going through now. So Digital Adelaide, Google Analytics Masterclass, and a couple of extra ones. So the Google Analytics Masterclass is a combination of our previous intro to Google Analytics and our taking Google Analytics further. So the morning is all about going through what Google Analytics is, how it works, basically out of the box. So people who are quite new to Google Analytics, that's going to be a really comprehensive introduction. And for those people who have a bit of experience, I generally find it helps fill in a few of the gaps that you might have in your experience and knowledge with Google Analytics. And then in the afternoon, we move into some more advanced and custom areas of Google Analytics as well. So things like conversions, event tracking, campaign tracking, those types of things. So if you're relatively new to Google Analytics, the afternoon session might push you a little bit, but I honestly think it's really useful to know what it is that Google Analytics can do, even though you might not be using it immediately. And if you're already quite familiar with Google Analytics and have that kind of morning as a bit of a refresher, then the afternoon is probably where you're going to enjoy yourself the most there. And next month's webinar, see you, Cara. Thank you. Next month's webinar is going to be all about digital marketing strategy. So I'm going to be going through the framework that I use to create a digital marketing strategy that I've worked with for the last few years. That's going to be on Wednesday, the 21st of August. So same time as today, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. And you can register online. That link is down below as well. We've also just released a free 30-page digital marketing reboot ebook that goes through some aspects of this framework. And you can go to our website to download that as well. So that'll actually step you through these different aspects, and I'll be chatting through them in more detail next month. And that's all from me. So thanks, Beck. See you later. This is amazing because I've actually finished within 1 hour as well. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Really good to see you all today, and like I said, keep out for those extra webinars that we have coming up next month, and all of our usual stuff going on at Scout as well. If there's any other topics you're keen for me to chat about on these webinars, do let me know. I do definitely take inspiration from the questions that you have, and like I said, this is really just touching the surface, but like I said, my goal today was just to give you an understanding of what it is, how it works, and kind of spark that curiosity there. There's a lot of information available online, and I'll be creating some more resources as well. So if you're interested in getting any more detailed help with that, sing out as well. If you need a bit of an audit of your account or a bit of advice and bits and pieces as well. So let me know. So enjoy the rest of your day. Google Analytics events. Juliet, yes, I have had that on my list for ages, going through events and goals and conversions. So I might have to bump that one up the list as well, because I've been getting asked about it quite a bit. So thank you for that. I'll pop that on the list. So yeah, I'm going to stay online for about 5 more minutes. If anybody wants to pop anything in the chat box or in the question section down the bottom for me to answer. Otherwise, have a great day, and I will see you online somewhere.